It's always interesting to preach twice in a Sunday. I'll try to make the same crack as I made the other one. I hope you're clapping at the end. Very good. It's so good to be here today. I was telling some of you earlier today that I do visit James River quite often, about once a month at least. But I usually am in the first service, so it's good to be amongst some older friends that I haven't seen in a while. It's good to be here this morning. I'm very thankful that Pastor Scott asked me to speak today, and I know that we celebrate his family having a wedding this weekend. It's very exciting. And also it's exciting to be here on the first Sunday of Advent as we think about hope, as we think about the beginning of the Christmas season. Already that we are starting to feel Christmassy, are we not, after Thanksgiving? I was like, man, what tie am I going to wear today? I pulled out my Christmas tie. How about that? And I know, thank you. And I know it's Christmas because I've already started to hear that song, that Mariah Carey, "All I Want for Christmas." It is played more than 10 times every single day, and on the radio, any radio that you know. And my goal is to hear it only once per day. And so far, I have been victorious to make sure I skip it and move along. Once per day is all I ask. That's all I want for Christmas. Hope. The first Sunday of Advent. The story of hope. It's a powerful one. It connects with us. It makes us dream for a life more than the one we currently live. For a justice that we are not currently experiencing. For a reunion with loved ones who have passed. I remember being in a movie theater in 1977, seeing a very famous movie. Many of you know what that is. Who knows what that is? Star Wars, yes, you got it. What's the name of that movie that came out in 1977? Well, yes, it is, but they had to go back and rename it because they made so many. It's called A New Hope. A New Hope. A New Hope. The storyline is so famous, right? There's a young person grown up in the middle of nowhere in a deserted planet in the outer rim of the universe, has special abilities, had no idea that he had the special abilities. Someone groomed him, mentored him, figured out how they were, and the oppressive, authoritarian regime had to be undone. And this person from lowly estate comes and helps us become victorious, and justice is restored. It's a powerful storyline, is it not? So powerful that when they restarted the franchise 2 other times, the first movie in that franchise took that same storyline every time. Phantom Menace in 1997, and again, The Force Awakens just in whatever year it was, 2010 or 11 or so. That storyline speaks to us. The idea that hope in a new leader, can deliver us from what is going on in our lives today. This came into focus for me this summer. I do the Baptist Collegiate Ministry at the College of William & Mary, as was said. I've been there since 2007, about 15 years. And our church, James River Baptist Church here, is a faithful partner with us in doing ministry at the campus. It's always good to be here to share that with you. I think very highly of, where is she? Is Miss Marion in here right now? She came and spoke to me a few minutes ago. She is very faithful. There she is, back there. I think she's 90 years old. Is that right, Miss Marion? 90 years old? Still bringing us exam snacks for the college students on exam week. Very excited about that. Many of the students know her and give her a big hug when they see her and stuff. But this summer, I had more students sticking around and staying in town this summer. And so summertime BCM is what we call it, Baptist Collegiate Ministry. Used to be Baptist Student Union back in the day, and some of you might know it by that name back a couple decades ago. But summertime BCM, we still did a meal, or people would bring stuff for a meal every night that we would do it. And then we would have a Bible study. And what was interesting this summer was that we had quite a few international students also joining us this summer. Many of them were from China. And what's been interesting about China, our Chinese students are kind of sort of stuck here in the United States right now. The government there locks down considerably for COVID. And so the fear is if you fly back home, you might not get back to the United States in time to do your schooling right now. So I had a lot of Chinese students in town this summer. And what was interesting is we were just doing our Bible studies each week. I started noticing that more were coming. And many of them were not believers at all in Christ. And so for our Bible study, we would have every week 1 and 2 and 4 or so that were just non-believers studying the Scriptures with us. And it became very exciting. Many of them had no knowledge at all. And as we started to go through the Gospels a little bit, in Matthew chapter 16, when Peter confesses to Christ that you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Christ is another way of saying Messiah in Greek. It became interesting to me is that not only should we talk about him being the Son of the living God, that he is God in the flesh, but also that he was foretold through the Old Testament many times. As we started working through the Scriptures, we started to go through the Old Testament, and we just kind of laid out the case that Christ was the one promised. He was the hopeful one, the one that we hope for. He is the Messiah. Now, this concept of Messiah, what is interesting about it is no one really ever has a clear definition of who the Messiah is, in other words, of what the Messiah will do. Its interpretation seems to change depending upon the dreamer or the hoper. At the time of Christ, the religious leaders were not in consensus about exactly and even Jesus' own followers were not in consensus about exactly what the Messiah should do when he comes. Through the Old Testament, we see that the Messiah would be a prophet. He would be a suffering servant. He would even be a king, and his kingdom would not end. He would make right all things that are wrong. His rule would be just, and the Jews rightfully would be in charge again. It would be just like when we had it under King David. Now, what's interesting about these people around the time of Christ was this was the problem. So often our human ways are not God's ways. See, it's easy to bring our own agenda when we finally meet the Messiah. We want the Messiah to be what we've always hoped for. And we also do this with God, do we not? We want God to be the God that we can control. And God does not reveal himself in these ways. And he truly did not reveal the Messiah to us exactly in this way. So what I want to do this morning, as we kind of made our study and started working through the Old Testament and tried to understand that this Messiah, that this one is promised, he is going to do it in his way. God is going to bring about this Messiah in his way, and he's going to lead us in his way. And so what I want to do this morning is to bring out this case, so to speak. Most of my Chinese students this summer were law students. And we want to just kind of look at a summary of the prophecies about Jesus. And I want to kind of think about it in a kind of a nerdy way. Our William & Mary students are nerds, and I'd say that with great respect, and I say that in a very positive way. I want to do this with some sense of academia about it, some sense of mathematical probability. I want to study the prophecies of Jesus or the prophecies of the Messiah from a mathematical standpoint. And then this morning, on this first Sunday of Advent, can we be encouraged with the evidence and our hope for a Messiah, the mysterious Christ, this one who's promised to come that will bring us the hope of glory. So I'm going to roll through a bunch of texts here, and we're going to go quickly, all right? So get your thinking cap on, go fast with me. We're going to just hit them really quickly. And a disclaimer is that each one of these texts deserve great meditation and reflection. And it's throughout history that we've come to see these as being prophecies. If you're seeing this text for the first time today, which I doubt, but if you're seeing this text for the first time today, it doesn't hit you as a messianic prophecy, that's okay. But as the scholars, as we think and study, they have regarded these as being messianic, as prophesying about the Messiah coming. So are you ready to go with me? We're going to hit this quickly. So here we go. First one is going to be Genesis 3:15. This is when the first sin happened in the Garden of Eden, and God is speaking to the serpent, and he says this: I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. So right from the beginning, we understand that the Messiah is going to be a human being. And not only is he going to be a human being, but it's going to be a male. Now, sorry, ladies, I'm not at this point thinking that we're not talking about capabilities of women right now, not at all. But you hear from the very beginning, the Messiah is regarded as being human and male, and there'll be conflict. There will be a struggle that we see that is spiritually there. The next text, if you will. God says to Abraham in Genesis 12:3, and it's consistent with what we had just read about a few minutes ago with the lighting of our candle. God speaks to Abraham, I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all the peoples of the earth will be blessed through you. And in the sense of this passage, it's that through Abraham, the blessing to all the world would come. And eventually, the Messiah would come through the lineage of Abraham. All right, let's keep going. Next slide. This one is maybe a little bit tougher to read, but this is when things are being revealed to David. God is speaking to David, that your house and your kingdom will endure forever before me. Your throne will be established forever. Down in the next text, I will raise up your offspring to succeed. Well, no, go back. Just the lower text there, excuse me. I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, one of your own sons. I will establish his kingdom. He was the one who will build a house for me. I will establish his throne forever. And as the Messiah is going to be a king, he's going to come through the lineage of David as well. All right, let's go one more further. Next text, if you will. We're in Isaiah right now in chapter 7, and with a very familiar text that most of us know, chapter 7, verse 14. This is God speaking through the prophet Isaiah to King Ahaz. Now, a quick word about prophecy is that in the Old Testament, is this prophecy meant something in its day. When this prophecy was given by Isaiah, it meant something for King Ahaz, and it was a sign for King Ahaz. Because Matthew has also said it also finds fulfillment in Jesus, does not mean that we should only look at this as a passage about Jesus. But in this day, in the speaking to King Ahaz, basically he was saying that a young child, a teenager, a lady, by the time she is childbearing age, she will have a son, and something will happen, and you will see it. Basically, he's saying that probably 12 and 13 years from you, something great is going to happen. And this is what he says. Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth a son, and we'll call him Emmanuel. This lady, this young lady, would have a son and call him Emmanuel. And this happened in King Ahaz's day. But Matthew, in his conversations with Jesus, looking around, understanding who Jesus is, wow. Hearing about Mary being a virgin, wow. This is that all over again. And we see the fulfillment of that. All right, so where are we? Let's go hit our next slide. Now, this one's going to be a tough one to read, but I'm going to start kind of bringing in some assumptions and start thinking about some of the math of this. You know, the current population of Earth is about 7.8 billion. And most of those who kind of study this thing, and I must say, there's just tons of assumptions here, and we have to make assumptions because we can't count everybody, right? The number of people who have ever lived before us are about 109 billion. So we represent one out of every 15 people that have ever lived on this planet, all right? So we're just going to start with a round figure of about 117 billion people have lived on this planet and are currently living now. Does that make sense? So if the Messiah needs to be a human being, there is one out of 117 billion possibilities of that Messiah being in existence, all right? Now, with it being a male, we can take about half that number out, and we come up with a number of about 58.5 billion people. So the Messiah is going to come from a group of people of about 1 out of 58.5 billion people. It is estimated that today there are about 15 million Jews in our world today. Now, I think that number is small. If you think about Abraham lineage and intermarrying and all this kind of stuff that's happening, I think that number is small, but we're going to kind of go with it. So about 15 million of the current population of the world represents about 0.2% or about 0.002. And if we multiply that times 58.5 billion, we get 112.5 million people. So in other words, the Messiah can be one out of 112.5 million people who have ever lived. Are y'all sticking with me? This is good? All right, let's think about David's line. So if we think about David as being one of the tribes of Israel, he's not truly one of the tribes of Israel, but he comes from one of the tribes of Israel. And from the lineage of David, we'll assume that that is 1/12 of the Jewish populations. Now, that is a larger number than it probably is, because some of the other tribes were larger, for sure, than the tribe of Judah, Benjamin, that kind of thing. But if we estimate being 1/12 of that population, we are down to a number of about 9.4 million people. So in the world's history, the Messiah would be one of these 9.4 millions. Now, already, this sounds pretty good, doesn't it? We're getting down. That circle is getting smaller and smaller. Let's go to one of the other facts here. If the Messiah is going to be born to a virgin, this means she is going to be young, and this will be her first child. So this will be the first child that she has. Now, the birth rate amongst women throughout Earth's history has been much larger. Most women would have many more children on average than we do today. Up until about 1900, it is regarded as being most women had, on the average, 5 children in their lives. Definitely during the times of Roman Empire, it was considered to be about 6. And some of us know people right now that had more than this. But anyway, just on average, every woman on the planet generally had 5 or so children. So if we take 1/5 of this number, we are down to a number of 1.875. Now, this is interesting. I don't know if any of you are geeking out and nerding out right now. Some of you are about ready to go to sleep. But already, so far, by these 5 prophecies, we've said that there could be 1 out of 1.875 million people that has ever lived that could be the Messiah. All right, let's keep moving. Next slide, please. I'm going to give you 2 more prophecies that are just remarkable, and they're going to make this circle keep shrinking drastically. In the book of Daniel, the Messiah is prophesied in Daniel chapter 9, 24 through 25. And you can see there on the screen, Daniel has had a vision about the future, and God now, through the prophet, through the angel Gabriel, gives him the interpretation of the dream. 77s are decreed for your people and your holy city to finish transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for wickedness, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. Now, there's a lot going on in that verse, but basically we're talking about one act that takes care of the sins of the world and anoints the most holy place. Now, most of us would talk about the temple, but it's interesting. I think we know where we're going here with Jesus, but obviously Jesus himself was the temple of God, the very dwelling of God. No one understands this, that from the time the word goes out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the anointed one, that Messiah, that ruler, when he would come, there will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens. All right, now what does sevens mean? Well, our scholars, they kind of play around with this. They consider this to be a week of years, or 7 years. And that number 7 plus 62 gives us the number 69. So 69 times 7 is 483 years. All right, now I'm just geeking you out, aren't I? Let's go to the next slide if you can. In the book of Ezra, we learn that the copy of a letter from King Artaxerxes gives the people in Ezra permission to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild it. And our scholars, not just biblical scholars, and I'm not talking about just Christians, this is regarded through people that study history quite well, that decree is kind of shown, even outside biblical sources, to be the year somewhere in the range of 458 to 445 BC. We can actually get that date pretty clearly. Now, if scholars believe a 7 from Daniel 9 refers to a week of 7 years, and we get this math, 69 times 7 as being 43, let's take that number, 458 BC, add 483 years to it, and we get to 25 AD. I don't know if you're keeping score at home. That's pretty darn close, isn't it? To the beginning of Jesus' public ministry. And most scholars today believe that Jesus was actually born at 3 or 4 BC, not quite at 0. And by the way, there's no year 0. It goes from 1 BC to 1 AD, by the way, and if you're keeping score at home. This is a remarkably amazing prophecy to get us where we're at. All right, let's show one more. Let's go to the next slide. But this is the one that really clinches it for us. And this is from Micah chapter 5, verse 2. But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come from me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from of old, or from ancient times. So not only do we getting the time of the Messiah's coming, but we're now getting the actual birth town. Now, this is confirmed for us in the book of Matthew, because when the Magi come, or the wise men come, and they come to Jerusalem, around the area of Jerusalem, and say, who's the ruler right now? Well, it's King Herod in this area. And they ask him, hey, man, we've come to worship the one that's born King of the Jews. And Herod's like, what in the world are you talking about? He's kind of jealous of this. And he says, man, y'all go find him and worship him and tell me where you go. I can imagine that Herod brings in the religious leaders of the Jews into his court right there, and they start talking about it. And he's like, all right, we need to figure out this Messiah thing right now. I can see the religious leaders of the Jews debating it out, kind of working it out, and they're yelling. Everybody, there's no consensus. They're trying to figure out what's going on. I can imagine Herod getting upset. That's like, stop it. All I want to know is where. And all of the religious leaders kind of sheepishly looking around the room, kind of going, I think the best guess here is if it's a guess, is Bethlehem. It's right down the road here, about 4 or 5 miles down the road, Bethlehem. I can imagine this, that Herod takes this information. That's all he needs to know is the where, right? Because we know his sinister plan is to kind of kill all the babies that are born around Bethlehem. So not only do we have the time period now, but we've actually got the place that this is going to happen. And these are part of the Messianic prophecies. All right, so where are we? Let's kind of get our circle smaller. Hit our next slide then. To kind of geek you out a little bit further, we had gotten down to a figure there a few minutes ago of 1.875 million people, I think, is that right? Something like that are possibly able to be the Messiah in all of Earth's history. But if we start taking about a timeline and thinking about 1 AD, up until that time, we take about half the population out. So in other words, most of the people that study the amount of people that have ever lived, and again, there's a lot of assumptions in here, but basically 1 AD is about half the world's population. In other words, half of everyone who's lived have lived up until the time of 1 AD, and half afterwards. And that's because of lifespans being so short during that time, more people having more kids and all that kind of thing. So that gets us down to 1 out of 9, there's about 937,500 potential Messiah people up until the time of 1 AD. That's 1 in a million. And if you were trying to make probability, you could go to Vegas with those odds that there's 1 in a million that could have been born before 1 AD as the Messiah. But because we have the dating of it and the place, this is going to really narrow our circles. We believe that there's about 300 people that lived in Bethlehem around the year 1 AD. And the birth rate for most of the people, they assume, is about 80. The annual birth rate at this time in Earth's history is about 80 people per 1,000 every year that would be born. And if I assume that we're going to take let's just kind of use one of those weeks from Daniel, for example, and say, let's take 7 years around 1 AD and say, let's look at all the people that are born around Bethlehem in those 7 years around 1 AD. This would put the birth rate at 24 people per 300. Over 7 years, this would give us, what's my math up there, 168 possible babies that were born over those 7 years. Now, if we were to take half of those, because just think out the ladies, right? And so we got the boy babies. We're talking about 84 were born during this time. And then if we were thinking about the idea that there's a virgin birth, and we assume again that every woman is having 5 children, and so let's just kind of say 1/5 of that number is going to be the firstborn of a woman, we are down to 17 people. 17 baby boys born in Bethlehem around this time could possibly be the Messiah. Now, are the hairs standing on the back of your neck right now? Isn't this kind of interesting? I'm geeking these people out right now at William and Mary right there. But anyway, all that to say is we're all geeking out together right now. We're thinking about this. If these prophecies are true, we have remarkably reduced the number of people in this world that could possibly be the Messiah down to about 17. Let's move along. We haven't even got to the good stuff yet. Zechariah 9:9-10 talks about how the Messiah is going to enter. And this refers, and Matthew brings this out again as the triumphal entry into Jerusalem on the week before the crucifixion. Now, our Gospels, most of our Gospels, particularly John, spends a quarter of the Gospel just talking about this 1 week. And we know so much is happening and being fulfilled in this 1 week. But here's one, the triumphal entry. Your king comes to you righteous and victorious, lowly and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. And will take away the chariots from Ephraim and the war horses from Jerusalem. And the battle bow will be broken, and he will proclaim peace to the nations, or to the Gentiles, so to speak. The king is going to come. He's going to pronounce peace to all the nations from what he's going to do. He's going to ride lowly on a donkey. What's interesting about this passage is, just a quick aside, is that it's very possible that Pilate arrived in Jerusalem that very same day, on that Sunday of the triumphal entry. And guess how he would have arrived? As a conquering military hero riding on a what? A horse. It's a very good chance that Pilate would have arrived on that day on a horse with a big parade as being a military leader. And here's Jesus rolling into Jerusalem on a donkey, lowly. Man, this is an incredible prophecy right here. And if you go further, let's go to the next one. This is a real quick one. I'm going to just kind of skip in order of time here. This is one that's talking about how that the Messiah would be betrayed for 30 pieces of silver. Judas turned Jesus over for that exact amount. And then afterwards threw the coins into the temple because he felt like he regretted betraying him. This is kind of worked out in Zechariah as well. And let's kind of move on to the next slide if we can. Crucifixion is an interesting thing. Crucifixion is an interesting thing because it really wasn't invented and used in the Roman Empire until about the mid-200s BC. And yet we have prophecies from the Old Testament written around 1,000 years before this, 1,500 years before this, that seem to indicate that a hanging on a tree was going to happen. Jesus picked this out in the story of Moses when the children of Israel were being overrun by snakes. And snakes are biting the people. And he says, God tells him, if you put a snake on a pole and have them all look at it, they'll be healed. Jesus, in talking to Nicodemus in John chapter 3, brings this out as some kind of fulfillment that he himself would be lifted up over the earth on a tree for the healing of all people. Let's move along further. In the book of Psalms, David is writing that, which seems to indicate his mouth is dry. He has his tongue swollen to the roof of the mouth. Dogs surround me. A pack of villains on either side encircles me. They pierce my hands and my feet. All my bones are on display. From another place in Psalms there, they put gall in my food and they give me vinegar for my thirst. Psalm 34, he protects all his bones that not one of them is broken. Now, I'm just giving you a few of these. There's tons of them that kind of indicate just little snippets here that at the time they were written, you're kind of like, what do these mean? But as we look back now, we're kind of going, oh my goodness, what in the world was happening? These are prophecies to us. Finally, let's look at Isaiah 53. Next slide, if you will. And this is one about the suffering servant. We know this scripture very well, most of us. He was despised, rejected by mankind, a man of suffering, familiar with pain, like one from whom people hide their faces. He was despised. We held him in low esteem. Can you hear the crowd yelling, crucify him, despising him? A very visible, visceral rejection. He took our pain, he took our suffering. We considered him punished by God. That man crucified on that day, he had that coming to him. And that's what the crowd was saying. He was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. By his stripes we're healed. And look at verse 8 there. He was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death. Though he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. He was crucified between thieves, between the wicked, two other wicked people, so to speak. And yet, where was he buried? I can tell you that any tomb that you can walk into at this time in Earth's history was a wealthy person's tomb. And Joseph of Arimathea had means to him, and he gave his tomb to Jesus. And so although he was crucified between thieves, he was assigned a grave amongst the wealthy. And even Nicodemus, who he talked to in John chapter 3, came and helped prepare the body for burial in that tomb. This is remarkable. If you want to hit the next slide. So of those 17 or so boys born in Bethlehem in a 7-year period around the year 1 AD, only one of them could be the Messiah, and Son of the living God. This mysterious Christ, the one we celebrate on Advent, the hope. We're getting in touch with the hope of one coming. This mysterious Christ comes to us, and he brings a hope of glory, both for now and for a time to come, when all that is wrong will be made right. And it's echoed again, Isaiah 7:14, in the book of Matthew. A virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and we will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. It's interesting with my Chinese students, again, all of them are in the law school right now, and we are studying through the book of John in this semester. And we laid out John chapter 1, verse 14, how that Jesus himself, the Word, became flesh and made his dwelling among us. And we've seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. And I tell them that John chapter 1 is the opening argument. It is the opening statement of a lawyer, so to speak. I'm telling you right now, this guy was God in the flesh. And now let me tell you all the stories that make me think so. And as we're working through this, John is saying to them, he is God with us, God in the flesh who has come to us. On the first Sunday of Advent, what are we to learn from these passages? What are we to learn about this quick overview of Messianic prophecy and how the probability of one who can fulfill this is getting us down to like, there's only one? The first one I would say is this, and I speak to the young people, and I would say anybody that's age 25 and younger. I'm not seeing anybody really in this room right now for that. Miss Marion, are we okay? Oh, we got one or two here. Age 25 or younger. You know, we have so given away the idea that truth is only found in our education system. And that's not exactly accurate, is it? We have thought about academia, and I love academia. Don't get me wrong. I love studying biology. I love chemistry. I love math. I love physics. I love literature. I love social science. I love all this stuff, psychology. I mean, I love what we can learn. But as we think about what is true, if there is a God, there are just absolute truths. Some moral, some are just scientific, but they are truths. And there's a body of truth. And if we begin to think that the Bible is not part of this truth, we've got a problem. And I'm seeing college students that arrive on campus right now who've been in church for 5 and 10 years of their lives that are biblically illiterate. They basically know little. And here we are, again, all of these messianic prophecies we looked at deserve great reflection and time and meditation. It's taken decades and centuries for us to come to see them as messianic. But we have. And as we study them, we can grow and learn about this God who cares for us, who thought so highly of us that he would specifically tell us, I'm sending someone so you can know me. The second thing I would say this morning is, what do we learn from this? Much like the people of the years right around Jesus, it is not wise to consider any political leader in our lives a Messiah. There is no election of any person in our country. There's no installation of any king in world history that's going to bring truly the justice of God into a place. Never. It's disappointed everyone for every century since we've ever been alive. A Messiah is not a political human being that can be lifted up in front of us and lead us in that way. And while I think about civic duty and being involved in politics and voting and getting in there and fighting for issues, I think that's a good thing to do, don't get me wrong. And yet at the same time, there is no installation of one person that's going to solve it all for the purposes of God. Our Messiah came for a different purpose than politics, and aren't we glad? The last thing is this. Today, we can put a trust in Jesus Christ as the promised Messiah. Actually, that's one of the most interesting things I told my Chinese friends, that Christ is not a last name. It's not Jesus Christ like that's his first name and last name. It's Jesus the Christ. In other words, Jesus the Messiah, Jesus the promised one. And we can put our trust in Jesus, this Messiah, the one and only Son, God in the flesh, and he can meet us today. We can put our faith and our trust in what we have hoped for. We can find a divine purpose in this world, a deliverance for ourselves and for our sins and addictions, the hope of a justice for all in this next life to come, and a reunion with those loved ones whom we have cherished and have passed before us. This is how we find ourselves on this first day of Advent, trying to be in touch with that time before the Messiah has come, finding hope again, and also finding encouragement again that the Messiah truly has come to earth and showed us who God is.